All right, guys, this is going to be the notes for 1.3 and 1.4. Again, we're going to combine sections. They're just vocabulary focused, but statisticians, they've got to gather data, and how we get it is always a challenge. Different companies, educational institutions, and medical institutions rely heavily on data to make decisions within their organizations. Three of the most common surveys, and there's different variations of these, but they all default back into this kind of scenario. You have telephone, where you call people on their telephone, or maybe send a text, but it's really, you want to be on the phone listening to them and them listening to you. The second variety is a mailed questionnaire. Now this can be mailed out across the country, across the world, but also might be done via email. It could be something where you distribute it amongst a school and you do a questionnaire, paper and pencil. Even though it's not being sent through the mail, it's essentially the same thing in that you're delivering it to people. They fill it out themselves without necessarily getting direction from the person doing the questionnaire, and then it's returned. Typically anonymously, but often these mailed questionnaires, we would know where someone's coming from. Personal interview, face-to-face, I ask questions and you respond. There are good and bad to each of those. None of them are perfect. A personal interview is really good. You can dig up some really good information, but people might not be honest in a personal interview because they feel guilty talking to another person, and that person might influence the way they ask the question, could influence someone's response. Mailed questionnaires take a long time to get all the data back, and you spend a lot of money mailing stuff out that you might not ever get back. And telephone, you're making a lot of phone calls and may not get people to answer or be willing to do it. Once you are doing this sampling or this survey, the way we gather people, we can't do everyone in a population, so we're going to typically do a sampling. The one option is to do what's called a random sampling, where you could do it by pure chance or by random numbers. You do need to make sure that you understand random means that you're not influencing the pool by any method. So asking people coming out of the school at lunchtime, it's not random, because only certain students leave the school during lunch. And so you kind of auditing or biasing your selection that way. So random should be purely random, pure chance. Everybody's just as likely as the next to be picked. Systematic, where you give everyone sort of a number or something along those lines, and you would take every fifth person or every seventh in the alphabet. You might say, okay, as people come out of the school, I'm going to take every third person out of the school and ask them a question. So that's systematic. There's an organization, so it's not purely random. There's an organization to how you decide which people to select. Stratified means we're going to group everybody maybe by gender, by age, by class in the school, by some characteristic that's useful to separate people by. And then I'm going to sample each of those strata. I'm not going to ignore a group. I'm going to go to every group, and I'm going to pull maybe 2 people or 10 people out of each of those groups to sample. Okay? Cluster feels a lot like stratified, but it is slightly different. We're going to divide people into groups by clusters, by something that's more geographic, something typically is location-based. Then we're going to select some of those clusters and do everybody in the cluster. So in this case, we might split the school into 25 classrooms, and we're going to sample 3 classrooms. But that means those 3 classrooms are going to be completely sampled. We're not going to leave anybody out in those groups. Other groups are going to be completely ignored, but we're hoping that these clusters will be generally representative of the group as a whole. And then you have convenient sampling, which is, hey, whoever's nearby and easy to work with at the time. It would be convenient for me to do a survey of my stats class, even if they're not the most representative of the school. At least it's easy for me to grab those kids and say, hey, let's do a survey. There are 2 types of studies in 1.4 that we talk about. We have what are called observational studies, and we have what are called experimental studies. An observational study is something where we're going to just let things naturally take their own course, and we're going to observe what happens and try to make conclusions draw conclusions based on that. So an example of this would be like, does a drunk driving lead to an increase in accidents? And so what we would do is we would look at, or maybe increase in deadly accidents. So we would look at all the accidents that caused death over the years, and we would look at how many of them had alcohol or drug-related accidents and how many did not. And we could look at that. Now, we would never try to get someone drunk and send them out driving and say, oh, look, did it increase the chance of them having a deadly accident? No, no, no. We would want to let things happen on their own, and then we just observe from the sidelines. The second type is experimental, where we're going to have an independent and a dependent variable, and we're going to influence or alter the independent variable and see what happens to the dependent variable. What happens to the outcome variable? You know, if I feed kids a specific diet, are we going to see a change in their growth rate or in their overall health? And so we might be able to do an experiment there and see how eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, does that impact their ability to have a high athletic performance? Or do they need more protein? Things like that. We could manipulate diets and look at the outcomes. However, sometimes there are confounding variables. Things that influence the outcome variable or the dependent variable, but we can't separate them from the independent. So, for instance, there's some genetics involved in the diet question. If I want to look at athletic performance, there are going to be people who are bigger, stronger, more athletic just by their genetics, whereas someone who maybe isn't as physically talented might try really hard to eat healthy and do all those things and might see an increase in their athleticism, but not on the same level that a premier athlete would. And I can't separate the genetics from it. Other people are very uncoordinated, and no matter what I feed them, they're not going to become coordinated. They lack the hand-eye coordination and some of the things they could have developed when they were younger. Okay, so that is section 1.3 and 1.4. All right, we'll see you guys in class.